So my sister says I'm an evil fracker. In honesty, the evil part is in humor. In fact, I'm an energy nerd and a lifelong energy entrepreneur. I run today a public company called Liberty. That probably tells you a little bit about me. Something I started 10 years ago. We're about 3,000 people now of committed, passionate people who believe in what they do and are driven every day. Our culture is to improve our families, our communities, and the world. And I'm going to tell you a little bit why that's not just an arrogant comment that we want to make the world a better place, but energy is just central to everything humans do. Everything humans do. Yet we're in the midst today, of probably the largest politically driven misinvestment ever, all in the name of an energy transition, This has costs. The biggest impact so far of over $2 trillion of government subsidies over the last 20 years has been to drive up the price of energy and to drive down the reliability of energy. What does that do? For moderate and low-income people, it makes their life more expensive. It essentially impoverishes them a little bit. And when you drive up the price of energy and the reliability down, every industry that uses energy, that's an important input cost, they just leave. California has the highest adjusted poverty rate in the nation today. Now, California's done a lot of destructive things besides just making energy expensive. But energy expensive is a big one. All the manufacturing left California, gasoline's more than $1 a gallon there, higher there than it is in the rest of the country. This makes people's lives worse. The United Kingdom, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, has exported nearly all of its energy-intensive manufacturing. And this is considered a victory. They've had the largest percent reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions of any country in the world on a percentage basis, but they're the largest importer of greenhouse gas emissions on a per capita basis of any nation in the country. It's a victory to export your blue-collar jobs, export your industry somewhere else and just import the products. Carbon dioxide is a well-mixed gas in the atmosphere. It doesn't care where it came from. But that's the kind of nonsense that's going on today. And it's because climate alarmism has been remarkably effective at swinging public opinion, at driving political action. In my industry, it's driving a growing ESG movement driven by institutional investors, regulations, state and federal regulations about disclosure and ESG, that the biggest problem facing the world today is we need less energy, less fossil fuels. Nothing could be further from the truth. So this last spring, I wrote a report, a corporate ESG report for my company called Bettering Human Lives. And in that report, we give kind of a fact-based, sober, that already puts us out of the mainstream there, a fact-based, sober overview of where the world gets energy, how that's changed with time, an overview of energy poverty. I'll talk a little bit more about that. An overview of climate change, an overview of climate economics. And this is stuff straight from the IPCC reports, but no one ever reads them, right? People who are driving policy, the media, politicians, they've never bothered to learn anything about climate change, and they don't seem to appreciate at all that the cost and affordability of energy is simply intimate to human well-being. It always has, everywhere and always. So these two ignorances about the importance of energy and about real facts about climate change are driving just a massively destructive movement. Not just destructive to the economic well-being of humans, but I speak in schools, it's turning people away from science, and I mean science, this process of questioning and challenging, not the science, this sort of top-down, mandates that justify what people want to do anyway, that has nothing to do with climate change. And how has it gone so far? So we're 20 years, $2 trillion of subsidies. In the year 2000, the world got 86% of its total primary energy from fossil fuels. So last year, in 2020, that 86% plunged all the way down to 84%. So calling this an energy transition, and everyone in my industry does that. The investment banks, the companies, you're supposed to write an ESG report apologizing that you're in our industry and how you're gonna get out someday and your energy transition strategy. Well, the low-hanging fruit is the start. That's the electricity sector in rich countries. If 20 years and that much money drove us from 86 to 84, that's not an energy transition at all. And look, this is coming from a guy. The mania when I was in high school was that we were running out of everything. And in fact, energy was one of those many things we were running out of. And man, I was middle class. I got above average quantitative skills. I've had a dreamy life. So my passion was to travel the world, climb mountains, and see the rest of the world rise out of poverty so they could have all the opportunities in life I've had. And if we were gonna run out of energy, that wasn't gonna work. Neither part of my strategy was gonna work. So I went to MIT to study physics, specifically to work on fusion energy, what powers the sun and all the stars. That's a virtually limitless source of energy. Turns out it's a tough problem, and we haven't solved it yet, but we will. We have fission power, another form of nuclear power today that's just fabulous. But somehow we don't like that one. We don't like that one either. So let me give a little, and then I worked on solar energy at UC Berkeley and geothermal afterwards. So I have no background in oil and gas. I'm not a Texas guy. I don't have a family in the oil and gas business. I'm just an energy nerd. But if you want to work in energy today and you want to do something that matters, what matters is fossil fuel industry. The biggest drive of decarbonization around the world by far is all in the fossil fuel industry. It's just natural gas in the United States has displaced coal as the dominant source of electricity in this country. That has driven down US greenhouse gas emissions in an absolute sense larger than the next 10 countries combined. But you don't hear about that. More important to me is natural gas just burns cleaner. So particulate matter, pollution, the United States' air keeps getting cleaner. The 6 named EPA criteria pollutants are down nearly 80% over the last 50 years. Population has doubled, our economy's grown almost 4-fold, but yet our air keeps getting cleaner. These are good things. But let's look back in history, a little bit about energy transition, since that's the buzzword today. We've really had 3. The first one is the invention of fire, because humans, compared to other species, have larger brains but smaller digestive tracts. We can't graze and eat grass or any grains and break them down and liberate the energy. Those carbohydrate chains are too long for us. So fire, or cooking, breaks down those carbohydrate chains and allows humans to liberate the energy from that. Food is just the form of energy that powers the human machine. So fire was a big deal, but it happened of order 1 million years ago. So the video clips explaining it all and all that have been lost. So we don't know too much about it. The next big energy transition was the invention of agriculture. This one's about 10,000 years ago. We haven't found the videos on that one either. And it was a slow process, and it happened multiple places in the planet at the same time. But agriculture was also completely transformative of human society. Now we got settled populations, the first cities, written language, culture. Most all of the things we enjoy today were just simply not possible until you could have large population density. We also got for the first time a class of people that didn't spend all day, every day, seeking, gathering, or growing food. Just a small part of the population, but they became the writers, the philosophers. They might have had NatCon conferences back then, but you couldn't before agriculture. What agriculture didn't do was change the lot in life of the average human. Life expectancy at birth was around 30 years, as far back in the fossil record as we can tell, and agriculture didn't change that. Life expectancy at birth globally was about 30 years, maybe a little more, throughout all of recorded history. until about 200 years ago. Amazingly, think about that. Life expectancy at birth was 30 years, maybe a little more, just 200 years ago. And then we had the third energy transition. Well, before I hit the third energy transition, before that arrived, look, all of us are here partially because we love Edmund Burke, who I first read in college, not in classes, by the way, just in my search for knowledge, his reflections on the revolution in France. But Edmund Burke, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, I picked those names because they're people we've talked a lot about the last couple days. Collectively, they had 12 children. 12. 4 of them survived to adulthood. No, I didn't pick unlucky people. I just picked the names we're talking about. Think of any other historical figures and go look into that. That was the norm, right? Low life expectancies were mostly driven by so many children never reaching adulthood. The third energy transition, the arrival of fossil fuels, which has mostly happened over just the last 100 years, but began, at some scale, maybe 125, 150 years ago. The impact of that is not only the planes, trains, and automobiles, the things we think of, but it was global. It changed the lot in life of everyone. Today, global life expectancy is 73 years, from 30-something, just in the last few generations. The tragic thing about this third energy transition is it hasn't happened for a third of humanity. 2.5 billion people cook their daily meals burning wood, dung, and agricultural waste inside their homes and huts. This is a passion of mine. I've traveled to 55 countries. There's always a smoky fire in there. It keeps bugs away. It's how you cook. And even in the tropics at night, it's cold if you don't have much for clothes. So this clean cooking fuels, thermostats, plugging our iPhones in, we take that for granted. A third of humanity doesn't even have modern energy, doesn't even have clean cooking fuels. About 80% of Africans do not. Even in India, 50% of Indians today cook their daily meals burning wood, dung, agricultural waste, and for a smaller number of them, lump coal. The pollution from this, we think of smoke as romantic. We go on our vacation, we get a nice smoky fire. If you do that every day, all day, that particulate matter, those just very small particulates, too small to even see, that you breathe into your lungs, the World Health Organization estimates that kills 2 to 3 million people every year. Roughly the same rate. We've lost about 5 million people over the last 2 years from COVID deaths. We've lost about 5 million people from lack of access to clean cooking fuel over the last 2 years. But you've heard about the former a lot, and you haven't heard about the latter very much. And the reason is the former problem has been hardest hit in wealthy countries. The other one is a problem of poverty. And it's not just in poor countries. In my own home state of Colorado, in our poorest county, 25% of low-income people heat their homes burning wood. This is urgent. And think of the other global scourges. Malnutrition and lack of access to clean water. Together, they kill maybe 7 to 10 million people every year. They come from the same problem, just lack of access to modern energy. The graduation fuel for clean cooking fuel is just a cook stove and a propane canister. Globally, it's sold as LPG. But when you have that, the smoke is out of your hut. You can turn on and off as you need it. Women in traditional societies who do almost all of the physical labor, women spend over an hour a day on average gathering cooking fuel, and nearly an hour a day in search of fresh water, or the freshest water they can find. Bring propane or some other form of modern energy to a village. You fix clean cooking fuel, you can have a pump and have access to groundwater. You can move food and crops, and you fix most of the world's scourges. Energy poverty is by far and away the biggest global energy challenge today. But yet we don't hear about that, and we're taking steps positively in the opposite direction. The world is meeting in Glasgow right now, and of course it's hypocritical. Like, this isn't going to happen. I'm not here because I'm worried that oil and gas is going to lose our market share or our business to wind and solar. Like, That's just physically not possible, and it's not going to happen. What I am worried about is if we continue to say things that are not backed up by facts and are not looked at by actual trade-off analysis. Man, I'd love to have a new fancy car, but if I buy a new fancy car, I'm going to have less money in my bank account afterwards. My wife is probably going to question what's going on with my mind. So there's trade-offs with everything that we do, trade-offs. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they also do economic analysis of climate change. And so that data is there. Now, we don't know the future, but there's a broad range of people working on this that bring out numbers that are published all the time. The planet has warmed about 1 degree, probably dominantly from human greenhouse gas emissions over the last century, because burning fossil fuels have grown the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by about 50%. And we can do the sort of radiation physics when we double greenhouse concentration of carbon dioxide, which probably happens before the end of this century. The simple math says that should cause maybe 1.5 degrees of total warming. There's feedback effects. It could be a little less than that. It could be more than that. The economic analysis covers this range of scenarios. And let's say the planet warms 2 degrees by the end of this century. That's kind of, you extrapolate the current rate of warming, which is 0.14 degrees C per decade. We'll hit 2 degrees of total warming a decade or two before the end of this century. The IPCC's economic analysis of that is it'll reduce per capita income somewhere between 0.2% and 2.0%. You heard me right. That's meaningfully less than one more recession between now and 2080 or 2090. That's real. Those are real dollars. There's definitely trade-offs here. But does that justify keeping millions of people or preventing millions of people from rising out of energy poverty, to deindustrialize California? Because it doesn't hurt if you're an advertising exec or an environmental advocate or a lawyer. Your utility bill's going up 30 or 40% doesn't change their lifestyle, But if you're a single mom, working on a farm or working at Walmart, the price of energy massively impacts your life. To me, it's critical that people are sober about this. Now, what has changed in the last 20 years in energy? The American shale revolution. By a blind squirrel finds nut. I got to play some role in the start of that, and I've been in it for the last 20 years, all in it. And what it has done is it's dramatically lowered global oil prices because of so much new supply, lowered global natural gas prices, created a surge in propane exports, which has lowered the bar for people to rise out of energy poverty. Today, just oil and natural gas produced from shale, there's a new technology, the shale revolution technology, supplies 40% of total energy, not total oil and gas, total energy consumed in the United States, 10 times more than wind and solar. No government subsidies, market forces, and critically, blue-collar jobs in rural areas. Who's been hurt the worst in the last 30 or 40 years? We talk about racial groups and education, and all those are real. That's a passion of my wife and I's. But rural people, the world is sort of left behind. If you didn't migrate to the city, you got poorer. North Dakota, 15, 20 years ago, was the 39th state in per capita income. And it had a population that peaked in 1930. 75 years of declining population. That's not a dynamic society. North Dakota today is in top 5 states in per capita income, and to the residents there, even more importantly, their population has passed the peak from 1930, and kids can grow up on a farm, have jobs, have careers without having to leave the family and leave rural areas behind. So energy matters. It matters for human lives. It matters for human well-being. It matters for low-income people and social mobility, low-income people to come up. When you hear crazy stuff today, check it out, dig a little deeper. Hurricanes are not growing. That's in the IPCC report. Tornadoes are actually on the decline. Floods, droughts, all of these things you hear ceaselessly, They just simply aren't so. It isn't even controversial that they're not so. But media, politicians just continually abuse these facts. And I'll end with one last fact, because anxiety is growing among kids. I'm sure everyone has seen that. 20% of kids go to bed at night worried about climate change. Your chance of dying from extreme weather today is greater than 95, has been reduced by more than 97% over the last century. There's just an absolute plummeting from 500,000 people a year dying from extreme weather to less than 10,000 the last couple of years, while the world population has quadrupled. So facts matter, human liberty matters, bottom-up social organization has always been the way to a better world. Let's resist this force of top-down control that's not benefiting humans except those in government. Thank you all.